Good afternoon, Melbourne. Welcome to the final breakout session before lunch. And being a room coordinator is hard work, but every so often you get to do something really amazing. And that's what I get to do today. And I get to introduce my good friend, Ming Johanson from Perth as well. Ming is an absolute force of nature around the Perth IT scene. She's an elected member of the Western Australia branch of the ACS. Also, Are You OK ambassador, and a myriad of other things. And we are incredibly fortunate to have her share her learnings and thoughts on invisible leadership. So without further ado, please give it up for Ming Johanson.
Thanks so much, everybody who showed up and everybody that voted for my talk. It's a little confronting and kind of scary. I also wanted to start off by saying I suffer from PTSD anxiety disorder. And I start every talk by saying that because there's always one person in the room that needs to hear it. And the reason that I stand on stage is because it's the safest place in the room. I know where all the exits are. I'll be the first running out the door. So today I'm going to talk about invisible leadership. And to start off with, I wanted to ask in the room, how many of you see yourselves as leaders? Can I raise a hand? Awesome. How many of you are aspiring to be leaders? How many of you want to amplify other leaders? Or people who haven't realised they're leaders yet? Cool. Awesome. So this started in a place of a conversation. It always starts in a conversation for me. And it's a conversation I typically have with people of colour, women or gender diversity in tech, when they're feeling a little downtrodden and they've reached what they feel is their ceiling. And the conversation looks something along the lines of, it is a position of power to be the most invisible person in the room. So why this is important to me is about reframing. Because so often there are amazing, incredible leaders who just haven't realised it yet. No, went too far. Sometimes you get to observe people when you're invisible. You observe them at their best behaviour and at their worst. In fact, on a flight coming here, I had the opportunity to have, when you're in the airplane and you have the two seats next to you and they're free, nobody's sitting next to you, it's great. And what happened was one of the cabin crew actually asked me really politely if she could move somebody next to me. And of course, well, I don't own the plane. I didn't buy those seats. Yes, of course. What I found out later was she'd actually been abused by a few of the people on the plane for asking the same question. It is a position of power to be the most underestimated person in the room. Now, I thought leadership was this sort of thing that would be like a straight, direct line upwards, and in no way was my leadership journey anywhere like that. In fact, there's a point where I actually went backwards. And that point was when I was working in Telstra. I was a business development manager in Telstra for my sins. Before I was a manager though, and before I got promoted, I was rejected for promotion. And when I was rejected for that promotion, I was told it was because I was too bubbly. Now, if I was a man, probably wouldn't have been told I was too bubbly. In fact, the unconscious bias equivalent would have been charismatic. And so I have a tendency, when I hear stupid things, I put them in a stupid box. And when I put them in a stupid box, I also tend to rebel against the stupid box. And so I started a coup in my store which looked like a bunch of emails to my team, basically not being very nice to my manager at the time. It was the most important, valuable lesson I ever learnt. And the lesson was, instead of berating me in front of everybody, instead of pulling me up and abusing me, what he did next was actually the most valuable piece of leadership I ever learnt. He took me aside and he had a conversation with me. And what he said to me was, "How do you think you could have done that better?" And what I learnt was leadership wasn't just about being in the position and having the label, it was how you acted leading into it and how you performed leading into it. So leadership is not a straight line. It is a fine line between stupidity and fearlessness, I found. Now, I mentioned before I suffer from PTSD, anxiety disorder. What this means for a lot of people who suffer with this is that we don't have a problem with failure. In fact, I am expert level at failure. Failure and I are like BFFs. In fact, we're a little bit of a toxic relationship. Probably should break up. What it means is when I start to see success or whenever I feel successful, I have a PTSD response. In fact, for most of this morning, I have been hiding in a room that Tian has wonderfully found for me so that I could be surrounded by silence and calm down. Now, a lot of people think that you have to have this superhero story, kind of like Batman. You've got to be Batman in order to be a leader. Some of the best leaders I've ever met have never had to suffer or struggle with strife. In fact, some of the best leaders I've met are introverts. So, what does it take to be an invisible leader? What am I looking for in invisible leaders? Too far. I like to think of invisible leaders like tea bags. Strong, resilient, make a good cup of tea. They're capable of handling hot and hard situations. And they still come out of it in the end. And they don't react out of aggression or fear. They help and support everybody through the challenge. I really like pockets. If anybody follows me on Twitter, I'm a big fan of pockets and dresses. I like pockets especially that can fit phones in there. I like leaders who are more than meets the eye. People who have a quirk, bit weird, like me. You don't have to be the extrovert, you don't have to be this loud, obnoxious person that we often portray as leaders in our society. In my journey with mental health, one of the most important and valuable lessons that I have learnt has been to fill from a full cup, not an empty one. The reason why I say this is when you fill from an empty cup, you're filling other people's cups with the expectation that they will fill it back. When you fill from a full cup, you don't need anything back. And it continues to overflow. And you continue to support a community. So, there are a few people I'd like to highlight as invisible leaders. I don't think David expected me to get this onto my slides so quick. So David, who hides behind the scenes, who also doesn't have any photos on the internet up until today. David amplifies all of us as wonderful leaders. He hides behind the scenes and he does all of the photography and the videography for DDD Perth, and he's here today in the back of the room, probably blushing madly and shaking his head. But he does a wonderful job of helping to amplify other leaders. People like Michelle Sanford. Michelle and I met over stickers. She bribed me with stickers to turn up to my very first tech event, and I was hooked ever since. I have fallen in love with this community, and it is because of her that I'm a part of it. Michelle is also the kind of person that we jokingly tell everyone she bullies us into doing good things. What I mean by that is she gets really cross with us if we don't fill in the form that nominates us for an award. And she angrily types in the application until it's done. And we love her for it. Amy, who is a Twitter fiend, tweets me everywhere. And I know this because when she goes overseas, I end up with a flurry of new followers because she's been talking about me to everybody there. Amy, in her own right, is a wonderful speaker. She is a leader in tech space. She is a HTML, CSS coder, developer. Andrew, who aside from being a client of mine, he's also one of these wonderful people who's part of the LGBTQI community, and he is committed to making sure there is a place for everybody in the future. Because turnabout's fair play. Michelle put me in her slides last week. She's also part of YOW conferences. She is an amazing amplifier of other people within tech. So what I want you to leave away from this is, it doesn't matter about the labels of what we think leadership is. Everybody is capable of being a leader, especially when you're starting out. Even if you feel like you're the most invisible person in the room, it is a position of power. Because you get to decide who you're going to take with you on the journey. We sometimes say some really awful things to ourselves. Our internal dialogue, if we put a speaker on our head and amplified it out to the rest of the world, we wouldn't say that to another human being. And a lot of the time we say it to ourselves. Everybody in this room is a leader, invisible or otherwise. So the reason why I do what I do, even though I struggle with PTSD, even though I struggle with anxiety, even though I'm actually an introvert, is that I choose to be the leader that I want to see. And that is the opportunity that each and every one of you have. Thanks so much.
I think we probably have time for two questions.
Time for questions?
Any questions from the audience? Or are we keen for lunch?
Oh, there's one up there.
Right, sorry, I didn't see you.
Thanks for that talk. My question is more around recognition. How, when someone is an invisible leader, instantly they are invisible. So what's the best way to recognise that? Because I feel personally a lot of these invisible leaders just go over my head. And do you have any tips on how to recognise them?
I think the first step, that's a really great question, thank you for that. The first thing is to actually empower them as leaders, because a lot of the time they won't even think they are. The second thing is to highlight how they've been a leader. So whether or not it's been that they've amplified somebody else, or whether or not they've supported somebody else, or whether or not they've quietly helped somebody without them even knowing. Like, there's plenty of times where I've supported people within the community and they have zero idea that I had any part of it. Does that help? Does that answer your question? Yeah.
Excellent. Well, in that case, please join me in one last round of applause for Ming, and enjoy lunch.
Thanks, guys.